All right, hey folks, welcome to another roster recap here at Rivalry, where we're still talking about the post-major roster shuffle. I know it's been a little while since roster shuffle, but of course we did an EU version of the video where Machine was joining myself, and I think we had Sam Dalrome on that one. But unfortunately, Machine couldn't be here. He is, of course, very busy at I Am Katowice right now, so we're doing this one without him, but we'll hope to have him back in the future for future videos here. Instead, joining me is the living meme himself, which is tolkienfanatic. He's known for his spicy tweets and his obscure knowledge of obscure teams and players. How's it going, Joe?
Sounds pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate. Also, let's add to that he is the co-owner and contributor of dusT2.us, also a contributor at hltv.org, and formerly a contributor to the Wikipedia for CSGO. So certainly a guy who has been around the scene. Also nominated for an award, I might add. You know,
yeah,
not to toot his horn for him, but
maybe next year.
Maybe next time.
Although I think I'm out of the running for it now. I think I've finally been a sung hero, so I don't think I can be unsung anymore. So really blew that one.
That is unfortunate. But anyway, snappy intro aside, we're going to be taking a look at all of the North American related roster moves that were taking place after E-League Boston, especially, you know, some of the EPL level teams or some of the teams we see competing internationally, but also talking about maybe some of the smaller names as well. And I think it would only be fitting to kind of open up the discussion by talking about probably one of the biggest moves that happened in North America, because obviously Cloud9 kept their lineup the same, and it was Team Liquid who actually made a big change. They had obviously already been in like this weird limbo state where they were swapping between using Steel and then their coach Zeus, depending on what they were playing in because of eligibility rules and things of that nature. And so we knew that Steel was eventually going to become a permanent fifth for the team once they got past all of that, and that did in fact happen. But then they decided to make another move, which maybe caught some people off guard, which was removing JDM from the team, who apparently will continue to play elsewhere at some point in the future. And they picked up nahtE from Renegades, who obviously have been making a huge name for himself from Renegades over the last few months, really becoming like a star-level player, one of the North American stars now, up with some of the likes of Cloud9 and Team Liquid in many people's eyes. So I guess first off, you know, to you, what was kind of your just gut initial reaction to this move?
I think the main thing with this move is that it's kind of the most surprising in that no one really saw it coming. I don't know if coming out of the major with the relative success that Liquid had there, even considering all the myriad roster issues they had, I don't know if you had asked me, I definitely would have said that they needed to make this change, right? Obviously, nahtE is a great player, represents a lot of firepower. My initial reaction was just wondering how the roles were going to work and who was going to pick up that up in the absence of JDM.
No, I think that's a fair assumption. I actually made a video like on my personal YouTube channel where I talked about this move in a great detail, and I've also made some content about nahtE in the past as well when he joined Renegades and he was doing stuff there. So if you want deeper insight on nahtE as a player and this move, you can definitely check that out. I'll shamelessly plug myself. Why not? I'm running this show, as I'm kind of playing the role of host and pundit here since we don't have Machine with us. But just talking about nahtE the player first, I think we'll maybe focus on him a little bit. This is a guy to me that has always been considered like this young, high skill ceiling player, even going like way back to the early days of CSGO. I always thought he was a bit overrated by a lot of the community. Like, obviously, he could be very flashy. He could put up really big numbers, but I just never felt there was any consistency there. And there was always kind of criticism about his attitude and personality conflicts with him and other people on teams. But he was very, very young back then, like, you know, mid-teens. I think he was like maybe 15, 16 years old through a lot of this period. And so I kind of gave him benefit of the doubt and thought maybe he could develop and grow as a player. And boy, did he, because, you know, in the later days of Optic, when they were, you know, winning stuff, like they won E-League Season 2, obviously, and had some other really good runs, you know, this guy was starting to put up fantastic numbers on a more consistent basis. And even when Optic kind of went in shambles with their lineup, you know, when you think about like early 2017, when they were still trying to figure out what the hell they were going to do after Stanislaus' departure, basically, which has started like a domino effect of different people coming in and out of the team, you know, he was still putting up numbers throughout that entire process. You know, he was still getting his, I guess you could say. And then for me, you know, he moves to Renegades, and the craziest thing about that was pretty much his entire career, He was kind of more of known as like being a clutch player, more of a lurker, more of a peripheral role type player, but would occasionally pick up the AWP. But he really changed up his role on Renegades, I felt. Like he was used more actively in map control. He would sometimes be like a secondary entry type fragger, kind of following up Azza or nifty's AWP. And so it seemed like he expanded his game and became a more versatile player. And he was putting up really good numbers. And obviously Renegades, for a short time there leading up to the major, were starting to become a bit more impressive. I think the event that really did it for me was, coming second at that iBuyPower Masters event against Cloud9. They had actually beat Cloud9, I think, earlier in the tournament, but then wound up losing to them in the final. But one of those maps went into overtime in the final. So, I mean, they were going toe-to-toe with what was like NA's best team in many people's eyes, as Team Liquid was still going through their process of figuring out what their file was going for. This was like right before they cut Stanislaw. But you certainly knew that something was going on there. And again, throughout this entire process, he had been a fantastic player. But I think, like you, I was kind of wondering what would happen with him, because I was wondering, okay, if he's going to this team that already has a bunch of aggressive riflers, and the op is a big question mark now because you're removing an opper to bring in nahtE, I was wondering, oh no, because nahtE seemed to grow as a player by becoming more active on the map and not being like a peripheral player. And so I'm thinking, oh no, is he going to have to take a step back? And remember, this is a similar storyline to twisT. twisT opened up his game by becoming more of a secondary entry fragger for Team Liquid compared to maybe his times in TSM. And so it's like, well, crap, it feels like one of these guys is going to have to take a back seat again, and that may affect their performance. But so far on Team Liquid, that hasn't really been the case. It seems like nahtE has taken up that kind of lurk peripheral role again on this team, and it still is kind of twisT being active, and Nitro is doing the bulk of the opping, but it does seem like, honestly, on mini-maps, they just don't op at all. Like, I noticed on, Inferno, for example, they basically just run 5 rifle setups, which is something they could never really do confidently before. Like, it felt like they always had to have an op in JDM's hands. So It feels like this has helped them out in that regard, that they can do 5 rifle setups more confidently. I mean, I don't know. What's been your take so far watching Liquid play with nahtE on board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they had a great run of form at Summit. So great that they won. They looked pretty good just now at Star Series. They'll be heading to Katowice. Yeah, I mean, so from that perspective, it definitely makes sense, right? Because you're removing JDM, who was a downright liability with the rifle, right? And you're bringing in someone like nahtE, who he's kind of an everyman. He can kind of do everything. I guess another takeaway that I have from this is I want to see that Area 51 era Nitro back that we saw at the major, right? Who was just kind of like the no F's given Nitro. I mean, honestly, Liquid looked pretty damn good for having 4 players essentially and a rifle dropper. So I think it's nowhere but up for this team.
Yeah, you would hope so. I think you're right. I feel like Nitro throughout his career has just gone through like several identity crises where he didn't really know what he was going to be as a player. Because we've seen him be the in-game leader of Team Liquid before, by the way. Like, people remember this. Like, I think this was around MLG Columbus time period, because Adren came back to just fill in after he'd already been cut with the whole Simple situation. Yep. And Adren didn't in-game lead at that event. I'm pretty sure it was like Hiko and Nitro kind of both doing it, but Nitro for a time was trying it. Nitro has also tried to be the primary op for this time in the past, taking it from Adren before the whole Simple situation came up later on. But he always played his best Counter-Strike as an entry fragger. And so then when this move comes up, it's like, okay, he did take up in-game leading again. Seems to be going a lot better for him this time with Zeus's assistance. Does seem to be embracing in-game leading a lot better. Like, we noticed this at Mykonos, because remember, Team Liquid, after the post-player break, did have like actually a pretty nice little run when you look at Mykonos and you look at ESL1 New York towards the end of last year. So it seems like the in-game leader thing is going well for him right now, but it's like, oh crap, you're going to put an op back in his hands again? Like, that didn't go so well the last time he had to do that. But since the major, it just feels like he's playing really, really well. And that's nice to see, because, yeah, certainly Nitro at one point was regarded as one of the best players in North America when you go back to, like, mid 2015, certainly a very promising prospect. Like, the Nitro Elige combo was oh so deadly. Feels like it's more of twisT being involved in the attack now than necessarily always Nitro or always Elige, but it does seem to be map specific or tactic specific who might be there with twisT taking something. So yeah, I mean, this is interesting. And to go back to the point you made earlier, we talked about how was this move even necessary. I guess I would have been curious to see what would have happened if they would have kept JDM a little bit longer, seeing as how they were bouncing back and forth between Zeus and Steel, like 4 events in a row was like swap back and forth each time, and so there was never any stability there. And so I do wonder, you know, what could have happened. But to be fair, JDM did have his issues towards the end, and also I think it's also a thing where you had the opportunity to pick up this guy who's been on fire for like the last year basically, and so maybe at some point it's less about JDM's issues and more about this ability, this opportunity to pick up someone like nahtE who can increase the skill ceiling of your team and open you up to these 5 rifle setups you didn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're not really going to talk about C9 much in this video, you know, there's an interesting parallel between Nitro, I think, that you brought up, and taric, right? Because taric is someone who's been criticized for kind of, in the past, previously wanting to do, I'm going to be an opera, I'm going to be an entry fragger, I'm going to be support, I'm going to do all this stuff, right? And up until the Cloud9 era, had been really criticized for kind of not really staying in his lane. So I think it'll be interesting to see if Nitro can kind of continue mirroring the success that taric has had.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting parallel. I also feel like Team Liquid even can bolster now some of the same strengths that Cloud9 have shown us. That is, we have so many aggressive prone riflers, even though nahtE, I guess, isn't, but he showed that he could be on Renegades a lot of the time. So if that's the case, you could almost do some of the same things that Cloud9 do, which is just like swarm and trade a bomb site, and you have so many riflers, Nitro, Elise, Twist, now nahtE, that are all very skilled riflers that can certainly open up something for you. And then you have the ability of a guy like, you know, nahtE, who I feel is extremely good in 1vx situations. Some of the other Liquid players have proven that same capability at times. So they definitely have increased their skill ceiling, and they definitely have a lot more versatility. I think it'll just all be about long term. How do you bring it all together? Because right now they're looking really hot in their debut. You know, these initial tournaments have gone really well, but they haven't really had a whole lot of time to practice yet. And we all know what happens then. Like, people start to scout you and watch you more and figure you out. You have to adapt. You have to come up with new stuff. Right now, I don't even know if they have much of anything. Like, I feel like they're just relying on defaults and a couple of executes. It's not like they've had that much time to drill nahtE into the team. So it'll just be interesting to see how this unfolds long term, because I personally am excited just to think that we finally have like a true NA rivalry again. You know, I feel like it's been so long since we've had like 2 super solid teams that are from North America competing in North America that truly can go head to head with each other without one being like the clear favorite, which it feels like it's been a while since that's been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cloud9 has definitely been the de facto #1 in NA for probably the latter half of 2017. So it'll be absolutely interesting to see how that rivalry will develop over the rest of the year.
How do you see it shaping up? Like, I know this is a little bit off topic, but it relates to Team Liquid. Obviously, we saw what Cloud9 did at the Major and made the finals of Summit, but Liquid beat them in the finals at Summit. And then obviously Cloud9 goes out in groups at Star Series, but Liquid's able to get 3rd place. So, I mean, how does this brew up, do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to say. I think really it's going to be dictated probably almost by how they play each other, right? Because these teams are going to be vying for some of these qualifier spots that maybe they're getting punted to the side for by virtue of being for NA. So it really might come down to just head-to-head who is better, and thereby get to see on kind of the bigger stages more consistently. But I think C9 are going to maintain their edge for a while, even though they kind of stumble at Star Series. I think that C9 will remain the top dogs for at least a couple months.
Yeah, it certainly could be the case. We'll just have to see how it plays out. I think it is fortunate for both teams that they've each been able to prove the ability to beat SK, which I think for the longest time was like SK was always going to be #1 for the North American region, but now we've seen a few different occasions now over the last few months, like both these teams be able to beat SK in a best-of-3 series to make a deeper run at a tournament. So the fact that that's no longer like the brick wall in front of either of these teams is probably good for their futures for both cases. But with that aside, we're now going to move on to our next topic, our next move. And this one's a little bit older, but we really haven't seen the team play yet since it happened. So I think it's still fresh to talk about. And that's, of course, Ethan joining Energy, which this team, as we know, has been through a ton of roster changes throughout the last year or so. You know, when they first kind of debuted their team, that's back when they still had Marky on the team. They obviously had Peter on the team. Both those guys are gone now. Pretty much the only original members left are Fugly and dapS. And even for a time, dapS was coaching and he wasn't even playing. So, like, the only original member was Fugly for, like, a short stint there. So they've definitely been through a lot, and this is, like, the most recent change. Just kind of what's been your gut reaction about this one?
Yeah, I mean, before the NAF news came down, this would have been hands down the biggest off-season roster move for me, right? I mean, kind of the sordid tale of what happened to CLG. Everyone, it's been beaten to death, right? But so getting nahtE, Ethan to like another pseudo top North American team is huge news. Really, the story of Energy, I think, for this next season is going to be, can they get out of their own way? Can they resist tinkering and making roster changes? Because that's really been their downfall. They've managed to qualify to a handful of DreamHack events at the end of 2017, but seem to always make a roster move right before arriving. And I know this is something that you've harped on previously. So I'm excited to see them start playing some EPL matches and see how they look.
Yeah, again, I think like before Ethan was picked up, like you said, the team had really been through a lot. You know, Marky in and out, Little Man in and out, ANJ in and out. He's the most recent removal to bring in Ethan. You know, Cert comes in for Peter. Then you had Rico in for a little bit with that's coaching, and that obviously didn't work out. It didn't seem like anyone really took to Rico very well on that team. He didn't really last very long on the team either. So it just didn't work out, man. And I feel like Energy's always had a couple of pieces I thought were really good that could give them that potential. You know, Cirque has been a revelation for this team. I feel like he's probably one of the most dangerous operas competing in the NA region right now. He's been very good. Every time I watch him play, I'm impressed by what he can do. Breeze has for a long time been regarded as like one of those young riflers that could have some potential, more of an entry type player. So certainly those were a couple of key pieces, and I feel like adding Ethan to the mix of that is really promising, if they can all mesh together, if the roles can wind up making sense. And obviously Ethan, very young player. I think he's one of the youngest pro players right now in North America, and certainly one of the least inexperienced, or at least experienced, I should say, most inexperienced. Because, I mean, prior to CLG, he'd only really played like on Premier and main level teams. And offline experience-wise, I mean, all of his offline events have been with CLG up until this point. His first LAN was actually only just like a little over a year ago at the Northern Arena events towards the end of 2016. So, I mean, it's not like he's even really been tested internationally quite a lot. So I think there's the jury's still a little bit out on Ethan. I think he's certainly shown some promise. He seems like a pretty skilled player, but I still don't think we really know who Ethan is when it comes to international competition. But I will say this about Energy: the fact that Misfits has died and CLG has died, there is this void, I feel, in the middle of the pack of North America to be filled, because obviously you got like Cloud9 and Liquid on top, and then you, of course, SK, the Brazilian team, they're going to be up there as well. But because of what happened with like Immortals and Next to 100 Thieves, and what's happened with Misfits and what's happened with CLG, it does feel like there's like this vacuum there, like this void that needs to be filled. And I feel like teams like Energy and then Complexity, that we'll talk about later, are probably the teams trying to vie for those spots, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Energy are really only the last mid-tier team left standing, right? I certainly, based on past performance, wouldn't put Complexity into that pack. So I mean, EPL kind of feels like you mentioned, it's Cloud9, it's Liquid, it's SK, Energy a step or two below them, and then kind of everybody else. And I think an important piece for Energy to add will be a coach as well. Like, they're a team that kind of has been resistant to have any form of coach for a while. So I think doing that could really shore up their kind of whole operation.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder how the roles will work on this team, though, because I feel like Ethan's always been kind of, on CLG, was always used as more like a main entry type guy, but that's exactly what Breezy does. And you could theoretically pair them two up and let them just go at it, and then like have Cirque as a knot behind them. But I feel like daph as an in-game leader has always been the guy who kind of likes to be with his entry fraggers, which means that Fugly's probably going to lurk or play like one peripheral role. So I feel like someone will have to take the other one. And I feel like you would want Breezy and Ethan to both be in like your entry pack with Cirque, but that probably won't happen because daph will probably be with Cirque and one of the two, and then the other guy will be more of a peripheral player. So I do wonder if that will take the wind out of whoever sales it is that winds up getting stuck doing that. Obviously, for certain executes and certain maps, it doesn't matter that much, because even if you're on the periphery, you might still be very active on taking control of something. But I just do wonder how you juggle that. I do also wonder this, like, is Energy still one move away from truly being something special? Because I don't know that I'm really sold on Fugly that much. I think he did do pretty well actually last year. He did impress me with some of his fragging and some of his numbers and just stats in general last year. They obviously kind of took a little bit of a dip when he took over in-game leading for a short time when dapst stepped aside. And now dapst is back, so theoretically Fugly should be able to focus on fragging again. But I feel like, I mean, when you think about Fugly's history, like his history with CLG, his history with Liquid, like once they got Hiko on board, it just, the original energy lineup that had, you know, Gabi and Legia and then eventually Tabson, like, he just didn't look impressive to me at all. And I feel like dapst has always had this crazy blind faith in him, very similar to nahtE. Like, he's always had a lot of faith in nahtE and Fugly. He was right about nahtE in the end, but I just don't know, man. Like, I wonder if energy's still one move away from where they need to be. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in 2017 we saw a little bit of a resurgence of Fugly, and I hope that we're going to continue seeing that form underneath dapst's leadership. I actually do like Fugly a lot as a player. I think he's kind of one of those guys that gets shafted a little bit in terms of doing a lot of the dirty work around the map. So, I mean, again, to my point, they might be one roster change away, but I don't want to see it happen for a couple months.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you let this move of Ethan, which should be theoretically a pretty big move if all the promise he showed in CLG is legit and it gets realized even more on this team. There is enough fire, even if Fugly winds up only being like a semi-decent fragger. You know, as long as Ethan, Cirque, and Breezy are all doing what you expect from them and like what they've been able to show in the past, like that's already a pretty good trio with fragging power. You do know that dapst usually isn't good for like too heavy of fragging, and so that could be like where your liability lies. Like I feel like you can't have both Fugly and dapst struggling. Like one of those two has to be able to show up and help the other three, especially if one of the other three has an off game, and especially when you're competing against the likes of Cloud9 and Liquid, who are stacked when it comes to talent. If you want to keep up with those guys, I feel like you're either going to need something special tactically, or you're going to need to be able to shore up the firepower just as much as those guys can. And the thing with tactically is I feel like dapst has always been like a very good at default CS. Like he's always very good at like laying a foundation down and running like methodical defaults and mid-rounding. But sometimes I feel like I have seen the strategy of his teams be a bit stale. So you mentioned coaching as maybe a potential solution to that, but they've been resistant to that in the past. So I do kind of wonder, like I think Sean Gares would be a great pickup right here for Energy as a coach. We know he's out there with, you know, kind of in limbo, obviously doing some broadcast talent stuff, obviously streaming and YouTube content. He's probably a good shout to maybe help bring some executes to this team or just help in general. So just throwing that out there, but I'm kind of curious what you think about all that.
Specifically about like dapst's like, yeah, I mean, I think that jives with kind of the scouting book on dapst, right? It is, you know, very defaulty, not almost scrimmy, but not in a negative sense, like just pretty basic stuff, right? So yeah, I agree with you that, and again, I think that this team is gonna have to bring something tactical to the table, right? Which is why I brought up the coach earlier, right? Get some support staff in there to help dapst, maybe allow him to do a little bit more DMing, focus on his personal game, and hopefully, you know, a rising tide lifts all of the boats.
Yeah, again, I think Sean Gares could be a good shout here. The thing is, if I'm Sean Gares, I mean, it's not like he's going to be able to coach a Liquid or a Cloud9. Like, they're pretty well set on that front. So if he was interested in coaching, I feel like this is probably the next team in line in NA to get involved with. I don't know if Energy already has, like, a coach or analyst, though. I know they had someone helping them in the past, like, as an analyst type figure. And I know they experimented with other people in the past, but it never actually completely went through. So I'm not sure what the thought process is there, how that would unfold. Do you have any insight?
There might be some news soonish.
Oh, okay. So, well, you'll have to tell me that after we're done recording. Apparently, it won't go on the show though. So we'll go ahead and keep it up, keep moving along. The next one we'll talk about is going to be jkaem joining Renegades. Obviously, now there's only one North American player on this team, I guess. Right? You have 3 Aussies, now jkaem coming in, and then, you know, only one we got is nahtE, the solo American on the team now. It was nahtE with them as well. But they compete in the North American Pro League, so thought I would throw their you know, name into the hat as far as teams we talked about. And this is a really interesting move, I guess. Like, for one, obviously, Renegades would have loved to keep nahtE. I'm sure that would have been the ultimate goal. But in a world where you're forced to make a move because nahtE has gone on to what would be considered possibly greener pastures, you have jkaem coming in, who was probably the least expected person I would have thought would have come in to fill this. So, I mean, first off, are you of the same mind, or what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, what I wondered here more than anything is kind of how long did this deal take to put together, and where was jkaem like on Renegades pecking list? You know what I mean? Like, how far down the list did they go before getting to jkaem? That's not, no disrespect to him, right? But I mean, he was a free agent, so no complicated buyouts, none of all that, right? Like, so I'm wondering kind of how long this entire thing put together. They did look okay at Star Series. I think that's just a question with jkaem and any kind of European player coming over to the US is they have these nasty habit of just kind of getting homesick, right? And I believe he's a little bit older. I believe he has a child actually over in Norway. So I question, how this whole situation
Well, apparently
will play
it's
out.
a 6-month contract as well, so I don't even know if this is a long-term plan anyway for either party. It might just be more of a let's see how it goes thing. I'll be honest with you, I thought nahtE would be the one to go instead of nahtE. Like, I thought Liquid were going to pick up nahtE. I thought that would have made a lot more sense role-wise if you wanted to still have a primary opper. But nahtE's rifles are also pretty good, so he wouldn't be that same liability jkaem is. And guess what? This guy used to be an in-game leader, or has been doing it for Renegades for a time. So even if you want to leave Nitro as an IGL, this guy can come in and kind of help Nitro out. Now, I've heard that maybe they did try that route and it just didn't pan out. At least that's what some of the rumblings I've heard behind the scenes were, that there was actually an attempt there. But for whatever, I don't know which party didn't want to do it, if nahtE decided he wanted to stay with Renegades, or if Renegades just didn't want to sell him, or if there's a mixture of different factors. But I know that there was at least a discussion that might have happened. And so I'm kind of curious, what that means for the future of all people involved. But when you look at jkaem, I mean, you kind of take notice of this guy, like late 2015 with G2, when he was playing with like Micah Laley and Rain and Fox and Dennis. And then later on, AZ, later on, Kiyoshima. They had some top 4 finishes with the team, like I think Cluj-Napoca 2015 is probably the most notable one. And then there was also the IM San Jose event, but they didn't really play anybody except for TSM, which they lost to. But the point is like jkaem looked pretty good at these events, and I think that people are like, oh snap, like jkaem could be like this other star player. Like, we already knew about Rain from that area. Could jkaem be this other guy? But then it felt like that G2 team, as it transitioned into phase in 2016, started to have some poor results, and jkaem's form really started to dip. And I feel like his stock since then has fallen off a lot. I know that he was kind of part of that weird whatever the hell Dignitas project that was supposed to be for like the PGL Krakow major minor and all that good stuff, but obviously they didn't make it very far, and then Dignitas nuked that whole project. So I don't know, man. Like, to me it feels like this is a huge loss for Renegades, for one, losing nahtE, and then this is like a pickup that, I mean, I don't really know what type of jkaem is anymore, what he could do. Granted, yeah, Renegades made it out of groups at Star Series. We have that now. In hindsight, we can look at that and say, okay, well, they made top 8 at Star Series, they got out of groups, cool, but I don't know long term if this is really going to work out that well.
Yeah, I mean, I think nahtE has shown that if you give him like a competent enough player, that he can make it work. He had that in nahtE. He has that to a lesser degree in jkaem. So I think Renegades will be okay.
I mean, if this was you, and you were like running things, do you think that this should be like a long-term option for Renegades? I mean, we know it's a 6-month contract. I mean, would you think that this could like truly have some like long-term weight to it, or what do you think that the future of this team looks like?
I mean, they have them on a 6-month contract, right? So, I mean, I think you definitely give it like halfway through EPL season, and if you're tanking and nothing's going well, then then you look at the pricier options of who can we buy out, who else can we get. But again, just like with NRG, they have to resist the temptation to tinker overly.
I think the scary part for me is, and maybe I'm just being overly pessimistic, but I thought that if truly anything was going to happen for this team, it would have been while nahtE was on the team. And granted, we saw some inklings of that, winning the Asia Minor, beating VP at that invitational event in Shanghai, getting that second place finish at iBuyPower Masters. But then, they didn't get it done at the major. like it didn't happen for him there. And I felt like that was like you were building up to that point. Like I felt like the trajectory was right, and then you kind of fell flat there. Now I do wonder how much of that was impacted by the fact that maybe nahtE was already out the door when they went to that major. Like maybe they already knew he was on his way out. And that certainly can impact things. Sometimes it helps you do better because the pressure's off, but sometimes it can impact you negatively. You never really know. So I don't know. That's what scares me. I feel like that was Renegade's chance. Like you got nahtE, he's been developing really well. Now you had this NAF guy who was really developing underneath your brand and was like your star player. JKS actually had a pretty big return to form there. I know he kind of fell short at the major, but like in general, you know, he had seen a return to form on Renegades throughout some of the other tournaments they were successful in prior to the major. And I thought that was their window, I thought. And now I'm concerned, like, will they ever get a window like that again, whatever they do with the future of this lineup?
So the counterpoint I have for you there is that Nico leaves Mousesports and everyone thinks Mousesports is going to die, right? But, you know, somehow that move has wound up benefiting both parties pretty well. So I'm not saying that is going to happen here, but it has happened before.
True. It would just have to come down to Renegades being able to find a way to sign talent, you know, if they wind up needing it down the road, finding a way to attract talent to that team. I don't know if they're really attractive enough to like really big names, but I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see how it goes. Certainly not too shabby of a debut at Star Series. I mean, it's nothing crazy special, but certainly was better than what Cloud9 did, I guess you could say. Different teams involved, of course, though. You got to take that into consideration. But,
yep.
I mean, I think that's probably the goal accomplished. Like, that's probably what they were hoping for out of that event, which is to get out of groups, and they got that. Anything else would have been a bonus. I mean, the team. Who do they play in the quarterfinals? They played someone like really strong in the quarterfinals, so I don't even know that. I think it was actually. I'm not 100% sure on that. So didn't really expect them to go ham anyway, right? So
yeah.
So next move, this is an interesting one. This is Complexity. There's a bunch of moves that happen within Complexity. So first off, they signed Finesse. Along that, Warden is no longer coaching. I guess he's moved to some other type of role for the team. They've brought in Rambo to coach, who is also a Complexity alumni, so to speak, fresh from his time coaching in Korea for the MVP teams. Then they picked up Professor Chaos as an analyst, who obviously is a former player in the NA scene. I think he was trying to do some coaching in the past as well. Not sure how that really went for him, but now he's back and as an analyst role on this team. And then most recently, they announced that Sam, who is a young guy that people will know from, you know, pugging and stuff like that in Rank S and whatnot, they have picked him up to be a streamer for Complexity. There's a key detail about Sam. He is currently too young to play in EPL.
Or Premier.
But since Complexity is an EPL, that's the more relevant point. So it does seem like, perhaps, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here when I say this either, that perhaps they have contracted Sam because they intend to use him when he is old enough to play. And so there could be another move on the horizon. But for now, it's Finesse coming in as an in-game leader. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, Slemmy kind of stepped back from the team willingly. At least that's how it has been presented to me. That's the official party line. So I'm interested to see what FNS can do. I am hesitant, right, because we saw CLG kind of rise up and then plateau underneath FNS. Like the entire team just seemingly like ran out of ideas of how to get better and how to improve. So I question if that same thing might happen here again with Complexity.
Yeah, I guess my gut reaction was, and this may be like not even a good one, people will probably disagree with this, but I thought Finesse could do better, is like what I thought. I thought like because he had a tie to I'm a Pet that like maybe Optic would even have been an option for Finesse at some point. I don't know. Like obviously he's kind of like in-game leaders. You're kind of stuck now because you're not getting on Liquid or Cloud9. So it's about trying to latch onto a middle of the pack team and make them better, which is what Finesse was trying to do at CLG. And you obviously already kind of noted all that. But Complexity to me is a team that has a very similar story to Energy, but worse. Like since late 2015, this team's been in complete disarray. Like pretty much ever since Simvis and Automatic left to go to that TSM project in early 2016, this team has been just a revolving door of players. I'll run you through some of them. Tried to bring back Fraud. Didn't work. Added def and Shinobi. Shinobi didn't last very long. Tried out Whitmer. That didn't work out. Got Surreal. He's not on the team anymore, but he lasted a pretty long amount of time. Got Android. Only guy who's still on the team from, like, you know, all these roster changes that we've been talking about. They had Uber for a time. They had 8 for a time. They tried to bring in Desi. That didn't work. They brought in Slimmy. Now he's gone. Now they just brought on Ye. They brought on Peter for Desi. Like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, how do you keep up with this? Like, there's just so much that has happened here. Obviously, they now with Finesse coming in, they still have Ye, they still have Peter, they still have Android. Other players slipping me for some reason. Who did I miss? Def, that's still on the team. Sorry.
Def is still on the team from the UK boys.
Yeah, so it's just like you get confused when you look at this team over time. But now maybe they're finally getting some stability, but maybe not, because I think Sam's like on his way in, it feels like, with that whole signing. I don't know who he would come in for. Isn't he an opper? So I guess wouldn't that make sense he'd come in for Peter then? If that's... I don't know.
Well, I mean, Sam won't be 16 until next season of EPL, right? So that's like a discussion for another day of... like, that's far on the horizon, right? It's definitely a possibility. Something about Complexity that they have kind of always projected is that they've kind of like been like this scrappy, like, bootstrapped organization, right, that are like constantly like dealing with lesser financial resources. Now with this huge investment from this Jerry Jones and some other people, I wonder if that will kind of help with the revolving door situation and constantly having players get poached.
You would hope so, right? I mean, that is true. Like, I mean, I've been harping on like the issues they've had, but to be honest, like they haven't had much of a choice. Like, I feel like they lost their brand power. Like, they used to be one of the biggest brands of North American Counter-Strike, and even in CSGO for a time, you know, before Cloud9 bought out the old Complexity lineup that became the original Cloud9 team, they still were a big name in North American CSGO. But that time is long gone. I mean, teams like Cloud9, like Liquid, like some of these other organizations have surpassed Complexity, and Complexity has not been, I think, an attractive team to people for probably at least 2 or 3 years. Now, like you said, they can probably offer more competitive salaries, so they might be able to attract people that way. But I feel like it's not just about money, because a lot of people can offer money. Like, if you're like a really good NA player that has aspirations to win, you need to show me more than a paycheck that's really nice. Like, there needs to be pieces on your team that I feel could help me win. I feel like picking up Finesse is the first step in that direction and making the team more attractive to future candidates, because now you have like a true in-game leader who does have some type of track record of success. Like, he did do some stuff with CLG. He certainly, you know, obviously there was that period afterwards that went really south, you know, eventually led to Finesse leaving the team and CLG not even being in CSGO anymore. But there was that period where Finesse really did prove his salt as an in-game leader. I think his in-game leading is pretty good now. You know, original CLG, it seemed like it was a little bit rough until they got like Peter in and like, or Pita, the coach, in, and like Cutler calling. It seemed like they got more discipline underneath that. I was a little bit skeptical about Finesse back then. But his second run with CLG looked really good. You know, I was impressed. I thought he did a good job with the team for the most part tactically. So, yeah, I feel like this move for Complexity, if anything else, is see what you can do with this team. But at the very least, we have infrastructure behind us now. You, as an in-game leader, can help us attract future talent. I wonder if that was even part of the way they got him, was like, hey, like, this is what we can do going down the line. Like, look long-term. And I wonder if that's the case.
Yeah, and certainly part of building a team like that, right, is getting those pieces in, but equally as important is being able to retain those pieces, right? So if you get pieces in, but you're, you know, like a selfless situation, right? You have all these young upcoming players, but if there's always someone going to be knocking on the door who can pay them more, you're never going to be able to go anywhere with that team.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, certainly outside of Finesse, like Ye is like a young talent they picked up that I remember used to play with guys like Sick and company back in the day, some different lineups. Certainly a name that people have thought of as being like a player that might have some promise. So they do have that going for them as well, aside from Finesse being like a pretty strong in-game leader. I've always thought Android was okay. You know, like, he's not one that's going to knock your socks off, but it certainly seems like he can contribute to a team pretty decently, and like seems like he has a good personality and like a good team player from talking to him, seeing him at events and stuff like that. I mean, what do you think about this team overall now? Like, let's just forget about the whole finesse part of it, but let's just look at the rest of the lineup and the pieces they have, and maybe add in, you know, the coaching situation into the mix. I mean, what does this team even look like to you now, like potential-wise?
Yeah, again, I question the addition of Rambo, right? Because it's not like he went over to Korea and like made MVP into some unstoppable force. So I mean, that kind of feels like another complexity getting the band back together moment. So I'm curious to see how that works out. Professor Chaos, I believe, previously coached and did analysis work for some previous iteration of NRG. He was there pretty briefly.
Like he work with some of the Splyce guys as well at some point? I feel like I thought for a short time.
Potentially, that sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have much insight into him as a coach and or analyst.
I've heard he's pretty good from people who have worked with him. Like Davey is like someone that has spoke very highly of him. Yeah, there's a few other people who have spoke pretty highly of him to me. That he's like that grindy, work hard analyst, kind of like what the reputation nahtE has. Of course, nahtE now has like some success behind him as well. That's like really increased his stock. But I heard that like PC has like that same work ethic. So if that is any consolation.
Yeah. So obviously, if that's the case, if he can bring something to the table, and I think most importantly, if him and FNS can kind of develop a rapport like he had with nahtE, then you know we could see complexity moving into that mid-pack of teams that we talked about, with having kind of that empty void after some of the happenings of the offseason. Because
I'm gonna be honest with you, like looking at former versions of complexity, when like apparently Desi was in-game leading for a time, Ape in-game led for a period. They've had different people try to in-game lead this team throughout the last couple of years. They've always looked in like complete disarray, dude. Like I had like when I'd watch a complexity, I have no idea what they were trying to accomplish. You know, like they didn't even have like a stable default. And what scared me the most is, you know, Warden used to always tell me like, well, I don't really believe in set roles. I don't really believe in, you know, and I mean to some degree that's fine. Like you want people to be flexible, and you want to be able to do certain stuff on the fly that requires people to get out of their comfort zone. But to another degree, having established roles does help build muscle memory. It does help build a routine. It does help kind of drill into people, like, you know, like a flow chart almost of like, you know, where I should be and what I should do if this happens. And that's how you develop your foundation. Like that's how you develop your default, and then you go into more complex stuff from there. But you have that foundation. I mean, everyone knows this is like the old school Navi or the old school SK system that we still see today in many ways. They didn't have that. They had nothing. And like I feel like I don't know what impact Warden even had as a coach on this team tactically. I didn't see anything. I'm not trying to knock on these guys too hard, because we know the challenges they faced, and we know that they had limited financial support, maybe even. But I mean, it was clear to me they needed some type of coaching change. I'm not sure, like you said, if Rambo's the right option or not. We'll have to see what he can do. But hopefully Finesse can be the one that really just does that, in my opinion. Like I'm hoping, because Finesse always talked about how he wanted to just take over CLG, but then he was kind of like in this weird situation with Ryu where they butted heads or whatever, and no one really got their vision across. So I'm hoping Finesse could just take over the team and like finally instill some structure into this team.
Yeah, and to go back to your point of, you know, Warren's comment about set rules, again, that's kind of all well and good, but you need the pieces to back it up, and Complexity is a team that has not had the pieces to back up that kind of play style for a long time. Yeah.
So, needless to say, I feel like there's really nowhere Complexity can go but up from like where they've been the past couple of years. Again, hopefully the financial infrastructure is going to help them. Hopefully Finesse is going to help them. And we'll just kind of leave it at that and move on to the next moves, which these next moves are going to kind of be rapid fire. I don't really have a whole lot to these. But the first one is XotiC joining Splyce. Now, I don't really know much about XotiC. I know he played on CLG Academy. I know he's very young. He's like 17 years old. The only time I've ever watched him play personally was when he was at that Unemployed for Christmas team with Cutler, Koosta, Ethan, and Rix. They took second at that Cyberpower PC tournament at the end of last year. And I thought he looked really good individually at this event. Like, you know, they beat GX and Splyce. He personally did individually pretty well against Cloud9, though they did obviously lose to them in the finals. Pretty solid numbers-wise so far for Splyce. I have heard that he has some real severe attitude issues, and I've even seen it firsthand myself when I've like watched some rank S streams and I hear the voice comms. He definitely does sound like that kind of person that might be considered like toxic, if you will. But I don't know anything really about him, so I'm not even gonna like confirm that that's like actually true or not. But that's just what I've heard and what I've somewhat witnessed firsthand. But I have very limited data to go off of to reach any conclusions about this move or XotiC as a player. I'm going to kind of lean on you to really help me out here and what you've got.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, XotiC is like another CLG refugee. It was really him and a proto on that CLG Academy team that were like really, that people were looking at being like the breakout stars potentially to get promoted up to the main team. Obviously, CLG kind of forgot they had an Academy team until right when they were going to release them, so that didn't really happen. But I mean, I spoke to Drone in Boston specifically about XotiC, and he's really high on the kid. The team seems to like the kid. I think they acknowledge that they know that he has somewhat of a reputation coming in, but they haven't had any problems with him yet. So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, that performance in the iBuyPower Masters with UFC definitely put his name on the map to more people that maybe didn't know about him. Definitely came out like right out of the gates showing that he can bang with the big boys. So I think it'll be exciting to see, you know, what this young kid can do in EPL. I think he's going to be far and away one of the youngest players in this upcoming season of Pro League.
Yeah, him and Ethan are probably going to be the two youngest EPL players. Maybe some of the guys on Dignitas are also quite young.
Guys, yep.
The ones that were actually of age to play. Rest in peace, Snakes. Hope to see you in the future. Gone but not forgotten in ESEA main. But we'll get to that one a little bit later. But yeah, it seemed like Splyce did need something, though. I don't know if they had Mitch opping instead of Synfis most recently, because Synfis went back to in-game leading, taking it away from Davey, who was doing it for a time. And so it looked like they had like this crossroads where it's like, well, do we find a primary opper again? Because Mitch wasn't really primary op material, probably. They tried it, experimented, didn't seem to really work. I don't think Synfis wanted to go back to opping, I guess, not if he's trying to in-game lead. So it seemed like being an opper made sense, I guess, in that regard. And like XotiC does look pretty skilled. So, I mean, in that regard, the move does make sense. And again, the team was struggling, right? I mean, they came like 10th in last season of EPL. Prior to that, they were in Mountain Dew League. The only LAN events the team's played in lately is ROG Masters and like the Global Challenge of Mountain Dew League back in mid-2017. This is a team that's not qualifying for much and hasn't had like the most impressive online performances in Pro League. We know that this team has experimented in the past, like internationally, with like Acilian and Crucial and Machine Gun. We all know that didn't work out really well either. So, I mean, I will say this. They have consistently been able to beat teams below them, if you want to say that. Like, they can usually beat like a Complexity or a Rogue, might get the occasional map upset against like a really good team.
Yeah, but in general, can't really punch upwards.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway. So, do you think this is what Splyce needs to finally take a step forward? Or by virtue of the fact that teams like Misfits and CLG and stuff has died, and there's that void we were talking about that like Energy and Complexity might be scrapping for, that by virtue of that, this will increase Splyce's stock? Like, when you add all the factors together, like what do you think Splyce can do with this move, I guess?
Yeah, I think all the above. I feel kind of bad for Mitch. Like, it kind of feels like he was set up as the fall man, you know, like no one else kind of wanted to op, so he picked up the op, and then, you know, results varied, so he's out of the team. But I think if Ely, you know, Splyce's coach, can really kind of like mold and craft XotiC, then he specifically will be someone to watch, and he can kind of help catapult Splyce up the rungs of the ladder a little bit.
Okay. So now we'll talk about Rogue. And Rogue seems to have a very similar story to Energy and a very similar story to Complexity, and the fact that their roster moves in the past were kind of crazy. So, I mean, this team came together mid-2017. Obviously, Hiko was like the big signing for them at that point, but then they picked up the Enigma 6 core of Vice, Wrath, and Shinobi. And they were not able to use Wrath right away because of age issues, so they already knew they were going to have to get stand-in until Wrath was of age. But then they also were trying to sign an opper, and they tried to sign Cirque, and that didn't work because he went to Energy. Then they tried to sign Wardell, and we all know about that real shady situation, in my opinion. That was really ridiculous. So then they use Uber and Whitmer, basically, until Wrath's going to be old enough and until they can figure out their new fifth. Eventually, Wrath is eligible, and then they get Cadian. So that's like the big sign they finally do make to come in. And I think he pretty much became an in-game leader pretty quickly after he came on, taking like over Shinobi's role as an in-game leader, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. But it still just didn't matter. Like, they did really poorly. They want to have them play relegation, which they did manage to avoid getting relegated. And in the offline that they just played in the last like Mountain Dew League LAN whatever mixture thing that there is. But yeah, other than that, like, it's been a rough ride for Rogue, and so they've made some changes. First off, I'll be honest, I was shocked they got Sick. Like, I thought similar to like Finesse joining Complexity, I thought Sick stock might be a little bit higher than a Rogue. But yeah, by all means, they signed Sick. So let's talk about that first, then we'll talk about the other signing of GMD. But yeah, let's talk about like Sick joining Rogue first. What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the signing of Sick made sense, like for him when you paired him with Rix, right? Because you're bringing in two pretty dynamic riflers onto a team. Where you're adding them with Vice, who's a pretty sick player. You have Hiko, who has done well in the past. And you have Cadian, right? But yeah, I would agree with you that I think Sick alone by himself could definitely go to a higher team. The problem is, as we've alluded to, there's less and less of these higher teams in North America, with the dissolution of two of these pro league teams.
Think about this. What if Complexity would have signed Sick and Finesse? Wouldn't that have probably made some sense? Do you think?
So who do you send out from anyone? literally
take
anyone.
Your pick. Like I don't know. Like, you make room for him. I feel like I don't know. Like, I think it would have increased their stock. But then again, maybe if you're Sick, maybe it just comes down to the offer that he got. Maybe he's biding his time to increase his stock a little bit more. I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to snowball. I didn't really put much thought into that.
Sick and Rix do have history with Complexity, right? So there might be some lasting enmity from that. So maybe on either side of the equation, maybe neither he or the organization would have even been interested. I don't know for sure, but that's a possibility.
Yeah, because when you look at Sick as a player, I mean, it seemed like he made a name for himself in TSM in 2016, particularly in the middle of the year when they had that top 4 finish at ECS. I feel like Twist has kind of outshined him since then. Unlike everything Twist has done since then, I feel like he's kind of overshadowed Sick a little bit. I actually had like a running bet with Moses on like who would turn out better, Sick or Twist, and I picked Twist and he picked Sick, and I was right. So there you go. But he probably won't even remember that. It was like at some weird CEVO LAN at the MLG arena where we were just talking in the green room about it. Back when TSM was looking strong and like Sick was kind of clearly their best player at the time. But anyway, but he still was pretty good on Misfits, I would say. So yeah, I mean, this I think was a good move for Rogue. This is a good signing if you're Rogue, where they were at and where they want to try to be. I think this move makes a lot of sense. So I give them props for there. But yeah, they were signing Rix originally, and then they just cut him for GMD like pretty shortly afterwards. This was a kind of weird from an outsider's perspective. Do you have any thoughts on this or any insight?
Yeah, I don't really know exactly what happened. Ronnie obviously wasn't very happy about it. Apparently his tickets to boot camp had already been booked, and then they kind of like notified him at like the 11th hour that, hey, we found someone else. So I don't really know what the inner machinations of all that were. I do know that GMD was another person that Rogue had been trying out extensively, kind of in this like weird limbo period between the end of EPL and relegation and all this other nightmare stuff. So I think in that sense, back to your Sick question, I think that Rogue have the potential to be better than their presence in relegation last season would lead you to believe, right? Like, if they could get out from under all the mismanagement and like personality disasters happening on the team, then I think, excuse me, I think they'll be an okay team.
Yeah, they definitely should, with these moves, be better than what they were last season. They're kind of like a similar case of Complexity where you can only really go up from where you've been, it feels like. Gamon is obviously a French-Canadian player. He's also very young at 17 years old, so he will be, again, one of these very young players competing in EPL alongside the likes of some of the other names that we've mentioned. I don't really know him that well. Like, I did see him play a little bit for French-Canadians in some online tournaments I covered. I know that he's done well within Mountain Dew League as a player. But he was never able to get his team promoted to EPL. Like, that never happened for French Canadians or like ghost Academy or any of the other teams he's played on. I've seen him opping some, and so I know him kind of doing that. But obviously, Cadian's the op for this team, I would imagine. So, do you know much about Gamond as a player? Like, can you speak to him, or GMD, however you want to call him?
Yeah, I mean, so GMD and Sabrosa were trying out for this team as like a package deal. And then obviously Sabrosa wound up going to Ghost, and GMD wound up sticking with Rogue eventually. I would have preferred, even technically, that Sick is a great player. I would have liked to see that initial package deal go through, and then you just stick the Frenchies on a bomb site and let them play together because they have that chemistry and that familiarity with each other.
You would have taken Sabrosa over Sick.
I would have taken the package over
Okay.
Sick.
All right.
Yeah.
Context is key. Okay.
Yeah, not just a straight 1-1.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like him. He's a nice guy, nice kid. Again, like I think it's good to see some new blood flowing into Pro League. So I like that aspect of it. And let's see if he can bring some of that MDL frag into Pro League.
I mean, what did you watch him much in MDL as a player? Do you like have?
I don't get to watch much MDL these days.
I'm sorry. It feels bad,
sad.
man.
I know. Yeah, I mean, so I watched them, a bunch of them at Fragadelphia when they were there. And, they actually took down Complexity, I believe, while they were there, and, played Ghost well, and the Onage mix that was there. So he definitely can go toe-to-toe with these guys. Again, it's going to be a matter of molding one of these young players into something good, right? And Rogue have no coach right now to do some of that molding, so they're another situation where I would look for them to make a staffing pickup.
There you go. So we will move aside from Rogue there. Now we're going to talk about Dignitas. So Dignitas obviously experimented with some European lineups that didn't really work out well, and so they picked up SoaR, who obviously was a team that was making some names for themselves. The way I knew them was through Broken Alliance, because I remember I casted like this E-League Premier qualifier where they actually beat CLG and Rise Nation, and they lost like a pretty close series to Renegades that would have actually got them in the E-League Premier if they had won that series. So that would have actually been pretty crazy. And this team was featuring Exceed, Voltage, Grim, and Snakes. They hadn't picked up MCE yet as an in-game leader. I think they were using this guy named MOTM or whatever. And so then they go to SoaR, they get MCE, they do really well in Mountain Dew League, and they wind up scoring some wins in EPL teams and some online cups occasionally. And then they just barely missed out in the Americas Minor, but then they get the EPL slot thanks to beating Rise Nation in the MDL finals. Now, we know that they had to remove Snakes from the team due to age restriction. This team has now picked up Mitch, formerly of Splyce, to come in and fill in while Snakes rest in pieces in main for a little while. But certainly this is a guy that we expect to come back at some point in the future, I would imagine. Certainly showed some talent when we've watched this team play. What can you tell me about this team? Because outside of what I've said, I don't know much about them. Obviously, I kind of focus more like on the pro team, so I don't really get to see Mountain Dew League teams very much. But maybe you can help me out with this team and what you think about this pickup by Dignitas and what you think about their chances in Pro League.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things I can say about this team is that I spend a lot of time with them at MDL, just talking to them, and they all have their heads like on the right way. Like, they're not like dickheads, basically. Can I say that?
Yeah, I don't care.
So they're all good guys. All very young except for MCE. He's like the old man of the team, and he has like a very specific way that he kind of thinks about the game. Like, he's one of those guys that like he can look back to a round like, like you give him an opponent and he'll be like, oh yeah, we played them MDL last season, week 4 on this map, round 13, this is what happened, and like play the entire thing for you. So he like has a very good CS brain, and like the team or like the young guys around him for whatever reason like really believe in him, like even though there's this age disparity there. Voltage sick offer. Grim has had previously gotten looks from pro league teams.
Yeah, he tried out for Rogue for a little bit, didn't he? I know he stood in front for a tournament.
He played in some qualifier with them. Yeah, okay. So they definitely took a look at him. They spoke highly of him. Unfortunately, it's very unfortunate that Snakes won't be playing with them, right? Because he pretty much carried them to that win over Rise Nation, and then isn't even able to play in the league. So that honestly sucks. And then the addition of Mitch, right? Mitch is definitely not going to fill the void left by Snakes, but he should be able to adequately fill in. And I mean, honestly, we've seen this team pick up wins over EPL teams before, so there's no reason to think that they can't do it in league play. I just question, it's very hard to go from MDL to Pro League, right? There's going to be a huge adjustment for these guys playing these high-level teams more consistently.
Yeah, I don't know. The pickup of Mitch kind of scares me because I've never really been super impressed by him. I thought he looked at a point in time pretty good for Selfless when he first joined, but anytime he'd play offline with that team, it just didn't go well for him, it felt like, other than maybe a couple of exceptions, a couple of outlier performances. But I guess in their situation, this is probably a short-term move. I would hope that they would try to get Snakes back as soon as they could. Do you have any we talked earlier about with Sam being signed by Complexity that it's going to be a long time before they be able to use him, not until next season. Do you have any indication when Snakes would be of age? Is there a way to get him in the team soon, or is it a similar situation where it might be a long time?
So their birthdays are around the same time. Snake's birthday is in July, I believe. And the EPL rule is actually that you have to be 16 at the start of the season. So we're looking towards EPL season 8 for these guys anyway. Regardless. So
if you turn the proper age midway through the season, it doesn't matter. It has
Correct.
to be okay.
Yeah.
So is that a change? Because Wrath came on midway through last season of EPL. So
yeah, that's a change.
Okay.
For sure. I don't really know the motivation for. I guess it's just less work for EPL, right? If they don't have to worry about when people are 16. But yeah, I mean, another function of the Mitch pickup, right, is like you alluded to, is probably going to be a temporary thing, but also just because of the way that the timing of these leagues pans out. By the time that SoaR/Dignitas knew that they were in EPL, all these other moves had already happened, right? They basically had 2 months that they couldn't make any changes because of roster restrictions for the LAN and all that stuff.
So, okay, we talked about how we've seen them be competitive before. They're getting signed by a big organization, so they're going to get some backing behind them. How good can this team be in this current season of EPL? Even if we know that maybe this roster is somewhat temporary because they eventually would want to bring Snakes back, you would hope. What can this team accomplish, you think, in EPL Season 7? How far can they go?
All this team should be worried about is just not being in the relegation positions. Honestly, if they finish 4th from the bottom in EPL, it doesn't really matter. That honestly should be their biggest goal. You're not gonna see them going toe to toe with a Liquid or a Cloud9. Maybe they'll take a weird map from them, but I would expect them to really struggle against the top end of the league, and kind of like you were talking about Splyce, they should take care of business against the lower teams in the league, at least getting ties.
There you go. So this ends our talk about all the EPL teams. We're going to do one more discussion about Torqued, because of them being at CS Summit 2, and obviously some fan favorite names are on that team, so I figured we would give them a little talk. But of all the teams we talked about, Complexity, Rogue, Dignitas, some of these teams obviously that are kind of below the Team Liquid move we talked about. Do any of these teams have even a shot at being a playoff contender? Because for one, we don't know how many NA teams will actually make it to the finals. They did increase it to 16 teams, right. But I imagine more European teams would qualify than NA teams. If I had to take a guess, it's not going to be equal footing anymore. Especially since EU has more teams in their pro league. It's 14 versus 12 as far as teams in the league. Obviously, I think we expect Liquid, Cloud9, SK to be playoff teams for NA, but let's say there's a couple of more slots up for grabs. Certainly maybe Energy is probably now one of the names to look at because of CLG and Misfits being gone, but of these teams we've talked about outside of all that, I mean, do any of them have a fair crack at it, do you think?
So I think it's fair to assume that we might see like a 10-6 split for teams. So I think you have Cloud9, Liquid, that's two right there. SK, three. I think Renegades definitely go. NRG should definitely go. And if you're talking about one more team going, I would say Splyce. Splyce have had like the best form coming, like if they can carry their form over from last season, they've actually had some LAN reps in that most of these other teams haven't, or at least LAN reps against kind of international teams, not just NA teams.
Right.
So I would look to.
Well, we
Splyce
forgot about
to
Optic,
kind of-
by the way. They're competing in the NA region, so
true.
that's probably going to be one of the spots you have to imagine. I haven't seen them play a single game yet, but just the lineup they have on paper, you would imagine that they're probably going to be right up there with Cloud9, Liquid, and SK for like four of the spots, and then there's just two left, and then you said Renegades for one of them. So then it really would come down to probably just like one more spot being available. And I guess that would be Energy in your eyes then?
Yeah. But I think if there's going to be a team that's going to like sneak into LAN by like some, like last season we saw Cloud9 didn't even make it to LAN, right? Because they started off really poor. So I think if there's a team that's going to put themselves in a good position to kind of get up there in the standings, if one of these giants falters, I would say Splyce.
Okay, cool. So we're going to end the discussion with one last team to talk about, and that is going to be tolkienfanatic. Now, obviously, this team was formerly GX, and some of the players are still the same. Obviously, have Swag, Pollo, and AZK, who are on GX, are remaining, but we had Dapper being removed from the team. Obviously, Daze had left the team long ago, and they had brought in Whitmer, who was actually in-game leading for the team through some of the more recent online play they had and at the relegation matches and such. But now they've brought in Steel to be the in-game leader for the team instead. And to give you a rundown of this team really quick, obviously this team came together in late 2017 after players got unbanned from being able to play in like ESL and eventually DreamHack events as well. Not sure if Faceit ever said anything about ECS. Do you recall whether they ever took a stance?
No, they never said anything, but there's been no update on changes happening, and these guys didn't play in the ECS qualifiers, so I would assume nothing has changed there.
Right. So this team did obviously play a Mountain Dew League last season. They started off really good. I think they went to like 7-1, but then they had like this 4-game losing streak. And shortly after that, Daze departed, and we all know about that already. And then, like I said, Whitmer came on board. They wound up doing well enough in Mountain Dew League to make it to the LAN. Once there, they did not do very well. They didn't win any of the relegation matches, so they're still going to be in Mountain Dew League this time around. But again, they made changes. They brought in Steel. They brought in koosta, is the other guy they brought in whenever we talked about some of these other changes. And so far, I think the team has kind of maybe caught some attention because they went to CS Summit 2. They managed to beat Vega Squadron and have like a decent map against Liquid, I guess you could say. Did wind up losing that Series 02, though. Obviously got destroyed by SK02 in the opening series of that tournament. But they've been doing really well so far this season of Mountain Dew League, and obviously their names on paper just like resonate with the community as being very popular names from CSGO's history in NA, as well as like Steel being like a pretty prolific streamer nowadays, or at least before joining this team. So kind of what do you think about this team, I guess, going forward with the lineup they have now?
I think that with this lineup, like they actually have a realistic chance of making it through relegation this time around. They're definitely going to be favorites in the conversation, and I mean something you have to realize about MDL, right, is that ultimately it is best of ones, right, in order to get to playoffs. But then once you get to playoffs, it's a totally different game. So I mean, all the experience and just the players that this team has, they definitely will be disappointed if they're not in the relegation conversation at all.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like when I think about Steel, he just has that winner's mentality of like being willing to put in the time, being willing to study the game, watch demos, try to be a good tactician. Like he just has that like ingrained in him. Like that's always been his mentality. Even going back to Counter-Strike Sword, he's always been a guy who puts his all into it. Like really doesn't want to waste time messing around. Like wants to take it very seriously, and he's definitely a guy who wants to lead. And so I think that's good for this team to be able to pick up an in-game leader like that. I know Steel in the past helped in-game leading by Power alongside Daze, so he does have some in-game leader experience in CSGO at a high level. Also, his fragging was pretty good at Summit. And it's been pretty good in Mountain Dew League as well. So as far as in-game leaders go, fragging-wise, his is actually pretty up to snuff, it seems like. So I think that's like a positive thing for this team. AZK seems to be finally like working the rust off lately. I think he was kind of struggling early on in GX, like last season of MDL, but it feels like when I watched him at Summit, when I've watched some of the more recent MDL matches, it seems like the rust is coming off a little bit. He's getting back to where he wants to be. Swag was a little bit disappointing at Summit, I guess. But that's kind of crazy because I know he stood in at the last Summit for Cloud9 and did really well. Like, was just pounding on people. And he's done well other times he's gotten a chance to play during his ban period. So I feel like that has to be an outlier at CS Summit too. Like, I feel like Swag is better than what you saw there and should be a strong player for this team going forward. So far, of the three names I've mentioned, like the names that are most recognizable to people, what are your take on like this core three, I guess you could say?
Yeah, really my biggest reservations about this team are in regards to the core three. In talking to Steele kind of about like the latter iBuyPower period, like one of his big issues with the team was just that he wasn't having fun playing with these guys, right? Now, I don't know if a majority of that was with Sam dazed or if it was kind of with these guys. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue going forward. But that definitely was like one of the core issues of the team that he had was just that, like, it was too much of a chore for him to play in that team, or it became a chore like that. So I am hopeful that won't be a problem and that this team will, continue moving upwards. But I do question, like, at what point, now that we're seeing these three guys get back to, like, in form, like, at what point does one of these lower EPL teams just take a gamble and bring them on? And how long can this team kind of continue going on with no organizational support?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's that window of this is the season. Like, if they're not able to get promoted to EPL this time around, then maybe that could happen. I do also, I would imagine that if they're able to make it to EPL this time around, they should find some organizational support at that point, and then like it would take care of itself then. But yeah, I think this is probably the window now. But otherwise, I think you might be right. Let's talk about the other two pieces though, real quick, to wrap this conversation up. Obviously, we all know koosta from his time on several different teams, Enemy, Selfless. Obviously, short stint on Liquid that didn't go so well. Then all of his time on CLG. Thrives at the level he's playing at now, I feel like, Mountain Dew League level. But I feel like if this team ever does make it to EPL and they really want to be like a top team going to like big offline events or something, like, it depends on how far their ambitions go. But I mean, I've just never heard like good remarks about koosta from like people he's played with, like not having the confidence to go take a peek or like willing to give up the op to other players. Like I've heard some nightmare stories about him in that regard, but then I've also seen him perform at times, but it just never like consistently happen. Like he would have a couple of really good tournaments, but then he kind of drop off for a couple of tournaments, and so it just felt like he was a little bit like shaky of a player, a little bit streaky. But certainly at the level that Torqued is at right now, he's a beneficial to the team in a lot of ways. But I just wonder going forward, long term, how that would work. What do you think?
Well, and I think it might also be beneficial for him to have kind of taken a step back down a rung, like to like a level where he just like absolutely farmed before like getting kind of like picked up to bigger teams, right? Like on some respect, maybe he needed a mental reset, like, and to gain some of that confidence back. I too have heard like various koosta stories. Maybe some of that has been ironed out. We'll see.
So last, we'll talk about Pollo, which is like the other piece on this team. I don't really know much about him, to be honest. Like, I've heard some things about him from like Launders. I think Launders played with him a little bit in the past or something like that. So like through Launders, I've heard a little bit about Pollo. But I mean, obviously I saw him play on GX and it wasn't bad. Like, I mean, last season of MDL, he seemed like he was all right. Doesn't seem like he's a burden or like a boat anchor or anything, but he's obviously like the least recognizable name on this team to many people, probably, when you compare him to the other names they have on the team now. Any thoughts on Pollo, and then like wrap it up by saying like what you think this team can do?
Yeah, I mean, like, I know that first of all that Pollo and AZK like had a little bit of a bromance going on, so like that's a good thing to have in a team sometimes. Pollo has shown that he can play at the top level. Like, he actually played on the Rush team that made it through EPL relegation to make it to Pro League, but then was cut from that team before actually getting to play. So he definitely is someone that has shown that he can play on that level. And again, just like getting the opportunity to play with someone like Steel Swagged AZK, like is going to do nothing but good things for him. And then kind of like I said, where I think this team is going, and you mentioned it as well, like I think they're definitely probably gunning for that one of those 3 EPL spots that are up for grabs. I don't know if they take like the auto promotion spot, but they definitely should be able to be competitive in order to get one of the other 2 spots.
Do you think it's possible that these names that we know have competed at the top echelons of like NA CSGO years ago, could they ever get back to that level again as like a 3, or even individually if they spread off to other teams? Do you think that they finally will find their moment again in top NA level CS?
I think it will be hard, right? Because of all of like the mitigating surrounding swirling factors, right? Like this isn't a team that obviously is going to be able to play at majors, right? So you have to be able to find 2 other people to complete the roster that are okay with that, right? Even though now they can play a majority of the calendar, they still can't play at like the biggest events. So that's kind of going to be like a perpetual problem for this team going forward, unless Valve like decide to do a 180, which I don't see happening. But I think this team can definitely be like a consistent like lower stage EPL team.
There you go. So any final thoughts, words, shout outs, anything like that you'd like to give before we sign off this video? Want to give the mic over to you. Thanks for coming on and helping us out over here.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for thinking of me. Thanks for having me on. It took us a while to make this happen, but we finally did, so I'm happy about that. And then if you liked all this deep analysis and North American content, then definitely go on over to dusT2.us. We got tons of daily articles about, you know, everything from ESEA Open to MDL coverage. Exclusive interviews that you can't see anywhere else, and we're going to be starting doing our own video content, and we have the next dusT2.us Masters that should be coming up in March. So that's about it.
Also, his Twitter is going to be on screen, so definitely go ahead and give him a follow as well over there. And other than that, we appreciate you for tuning into this video over here at Rivalry. We have more video content to come here on the YouTube channel, so definitely go ahead and subscribe up so you can catch those videos in the future. Also, give me a follow at FollowDusT on Twitter. And without further ado, we're signing out. Until next time, have a good one.
AK versus M4, headshot versus...
You want to bet on CSGO matches but are terrified of giving sketchy sites your payment info and other personal information? Yeah, same here. That's why we decided to spend a ton of time and money acquiring the most reputable gambling license in the world, allowing us to provide you and other CSGO fans with a trusted way to safely bet on matches. Watching matches is entertaining, but watching with some money on the line? Absolutely epic. Head on over to rivalry.gg and see what all the hype is about.